I never told my son how much money I really made. To him, I was just an ordinary mother who worked long hours and lived quietly in a small apartment. He never knew that behind my simple life was a woman earning $40,000 a month. He never asked, and I never told him. One evening, he called and said, "Mom, I want you to meet my wife's parents. They're visiting from overseas, and we're all having dinner this Saturday. Please come." There was something strange in his tone that made me pause. He sounded careful, almost nervous, like he was trying not to say something. When I asked if everything was all right, he laughed softly and said, Yeah, it's fine. Just, they're a bit formal. So maybe wear something nice, okay?" I smiled after he hung up, but inside, my heart felt heavy. I had raised him to be kind and respectful, to see people for who they were, not what they had. So why did his voice sound like he was ashamed of me? I sat there in the quiet, staring at the old photo frame on my shelf. It was Ethan's picture, his bright little face beaming as he held up his school report card. I remembered that day so clearly. I'd worked 2 shifts that week just to afford his new uniform. He'd never known. I never told him that while I looked tired and ordinary on the outside. I was managing a team of hundreds, signing deals worth millions, and earning more money than I could ever spend. He thought his mother was just another office worker. And I never corrected him. Why? Because I never wanted my success to change the way he saw love. I grew up believing that dignity lives in silence, that you don't need to prove your worth to anyone. For years, I lived like that. Quietly, simply. I wore the same brown handbag until the leather cracked. I lived in the same apartment for 2 decades. I cooked at home, took the bus, and never once bragged about what I had. But when Ethan mentioned that dinner, when he said, "Wear something nice," something inside me shifted. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of family my daughter-in-law came from. Did they look down on people who lived simply? Did they see kindness as weakness? Would they treat me differently if they thought I was poor? That night, as I stood by my kitchen window watching the rain hit the glass, I made a decision. I would meet them exactly the way they expected me to be. A simple, middle-aged mother, a little naive, a little plain. I wanted to see how they would treat someone who had nothing to give them. On Saturday, I opened my closet and ran my fingers along the neat row of blouses and dresses. My eyes landed on a soft beige dress, one I usually wore when visiting the local market. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and modest. I tied my hair in a low bun, slipped on my old shoes, and took a deep breath. In the mirror, I didn't see the executive who earned $40,000 a month. I saw a mother, quiet, ordinary, and strong in her own way. When I walked into the restaurant that evening, everything changed. The lights were dim, the air filled with the scent of perfume and expensive wine. I spotted my son at a table near the corner. He waved when he saw me, his smile tight, his movements stiff. Next to him sat his wife, Lena, and across from them, her parents. Her mother's pearls gleamed like tiny moons under the chandelier. Her father's gold watch flashed every time he moved his hand. I greeted them kindly. "Good evening. It's so nice to finally meet you." Lena's mother gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Walker, we've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I said softly. "Of course," she replied, her gaze flicking quickly from my dress to my handbag. It lasted only a second, but I noticed. Her husband nodded politely, though his expression carried a hint of amusement, as if he already knew who I was supposed to be. We sat down. The waiter brought menus that looked more like art books than lists of food. The conversation began lightly, about the city, the weather, how beautiful the restaurant was. But soon, it shifted. They talked about their travels, Paris, Tokyo, Milan, and how their daughter had always had refined taste. Then, almost casually, Lena's mother turned to me and said, "And what do you do, Mrs. Walker? Are you retired?" I smiled. "Oh no, I still work. Office work mostly." "Ah," she said, nodding slowly. "That's wonderful. It's always good to stay busy." Her tone was polite, but her eyes said something else. They said, "You're not one of us." I kept my smile. "Yes, it keeps me young." I could feel the energy around the table shift. They spoke to me kindly, but with that gentle layer of condescension that people often use when they believe they're above you. They asked about my apartment, about whether I had ever traveled, and about what I liked to do in my free time. I answered every question simply, calmly, without pride or pretense. And through it all, my son said very little. He sat there quietly, watching me, his expression unreadable. When dessert came, I stood up and excused myself for a moment. Inside the restroom, I looked at myself in the mirror. My heart was steady. There was no anger, no humiliation, just quiet realization. People always reveal themselves when they think you have nothing to offer them. When I returned to the table, the waiter was handing Ethan the bill. He reached for his wallet, but I gently placed my hand over his. "I'll take care of it," I said softly. Lena blinked. "Oh no, Mrs. Walker, please. We invited you." "It's all right," I replied. "Let me." I handed the waiter my gold card, the one I kept tucked deep inside my bag, the one I almost never used. When the waiter returned and thanked me by name, I saw it. That flicker of confusion in Lena's mother's eyes, the tiny twitch in her father's smile. They didn't expect that. Neither did Ethan. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I just smiled. It was a lovely evening. Thank you all for having me. As I walked out of that restaurant, I could feel every step echo softly beneath the chandeliers. I didn't need to say a word. They had already learned something that night, something they would never forget. But that dinner was only the beginning. What happened after that changed everything. For them, for Ethan, and for me. And it all started with a lie I told. A lie that revealed the truth about everyone around me. The night after that dinner, I barely slept. Not because I was upset. No, it wasn't that. It was the quiet heaviness that comes when you realize something you've known all along has just been proven true. I sat by my window until midnight, the city lights flickering below. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle tapping gently against the glass. I watched the tiny droplets slide down, merging, separating, disappearing. That's how people are too, I thought. We cross paths, we merge for a moment, and then we drift apart. Ethan hadn't called me after dinner. Neither had Lena. That silence said more than words could, but I didn't reach out either. I wanted them to sit with their own thoughts for a while, to think about what they'd seen and what it meant. The next morning, I went about my routine like always. Coffee at 6, news at 7, then off to work. My office sat on the 19th floor of a tall glass building downtown. From my window, I could see the same restaurant we'd been at the night before. It looked so small from up there. All that noise, all that judgment, all that pride, reduced to a little dot in the city. When I walked into the meeting room, my colleagues greeted me the same way they always did. "Good morning, Ms. Reed." "Morning, everyone," I replied. Setting my files down, we had a major contract to finalize that day, a 7-figure deal with a European client. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just hours ago, my daughter-in-law's parents had been talking about status and success, while the woman they dismissed was preparing to sign a contract that would change her company's future. By noon, My phone buzzed. Ethan. For a second, I just stared at it, letting it ring once, twice, before I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, can we talk? Are you free this evening? His voice was tight. Careful. Of course, I said gently. Come by after work. That evening, he showed up at my apartment. Still in his office clothes, tie slightly loosened, hair messy from running his hands through it, a habit he'd had since childhood whenever he was anxious. He didn't even take off his shoes before blurting it out. Mom. What happened last night? I looked at him, calm and patient. What do you mean, dear? You paid for everything with that card. I didn't even know you had one like that. Lena's parents couldn't stop talking about it on the way home. They're asking questions, and I don't even have answers. I smiled softly. I just paid for dinner, Ethan. Nothing more. He ran a hand through his hair again. Mom, they think you're rich, do they? He looked at me exasperated. Are you? There it was, the question I'd avoided for years. I didn't want to lie to him. But I also didn't want to sound like I was bragging, so I chose my words carefully. I've been fortunate, I said. I worked hard, saved wisely. That's all. He sat down on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. All this time I thought you were struggling. I was at first, I said softly. But I built my life slowly, piece by piece. I never wanted you to feel pressured or small in comparison. You were building your own life. I wanted you to grow without measuring yourself against me. He looked up, his eyes uncertain. But why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled gently. Because you never asked. He fell silent for a long moment. Then he said something that made my heart sink. Lena's parents think you were pretending last night. They said it was manipulative, like you wanted to embarrass them. I took a slow breath. And what do you think? He hesitated. I think maybe you could have told me before. They feel like you set them up. That hurt. Not because of the words, but because of where they came from. My son. My boy. I looked at him for a moment, studying his face. The same eyes I'd once wiped tears from, the same lips I'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. Ethan, I said quietly, sometimes truth looks like a trap to those who are ashamed of their own behavior. He blinked, unsure how to respond. I didn't pretend to embarrass anyone. I simply gave them what they expected to see. The rest, that came from their own hearts. He sighed, leaning back, guilt flickering across his face. Mom, they're upset. Lena feels humiliated. They think you did it on purpose. I shook my head slowly. I didn't need to do anything. Their reactions revealed who they are. He rubbed his face. I don't know how to fix this. I reached out and touched his hand gently. Some things don't need fixing, Ethan. They just need understanding. He looked at me. Really looked. And for a moment, I saw that little boy again. The one who used to trust his mother without question. But he was torn now. Between love and pride. Between his wife's family and me. When he left that evening, he hugged me quickly, then said, I'll talk to them. I wish this had gone differently. After the door closed, I stood there in silence. The smell of his cologne lingered in the air. I whispered to myself, So do I, son. So do I. The next few days were quiet. No calls. No visits. At work, I kept my composure, but at night, the silence felt heavier. It wasn't loneliness. It was the ache of knowing that truth can divide as easily as it heals. By Thursday, Lena finally called. Her tone was soft, but not warm. Mrs. Reed, do you have a moment to talk? Of course, dear, I said. I just wanted to clarify something. My parents were a bit surprised by how things went at dinner. They felt a little misled. I understand, I said. They didn't mean any harm. It's just, they thought you were struggling and they adjusted their behavior accordingly? I finished for her gently. There was silence on the other end. I didn't mean it like that, she said quietly. I know, dear, I said. But maybe it's time to ask ourselves why kindness changes when money enters the room. Another pause. Then she said, almost defensively, They're not bad people. I never said they were, I replied softly. Sometimes people just need to see themselves clearly, and sometimes life gives them a mirror. Her voice cracked slightly. Ethan's been distant since that night. He's confused. I don't want him caught in the middle. I don't either, I said gently. I love my son, Lena, more than you can imagine. And I love peace even more. So what happens now? She asked. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Now we wait. Truth has a way of settling everything in its own time. Days turned into weeks. Ethan didn't visit, but he called now and then. Small talk, mostly. Work, weather, nothing deep. Then, one Sunday morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Lena was standing there holding a small box in her hands. May I come in? She asked softly. Of course. She sat on the couch, her eyes darting around the room, at the old photographs, the simple curtains, the worn rug. Everything looked just as she'd seen before. She placed the box on the table and took a deep breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said quietly. For how my parents behaved. For how I behaved? Her voice trembled slightly. I judged you, Mrs. Reed. I didn't mean to, but I did. I thought you were just an ordinary woman, I smiled faintly. I am an ordinary woman, she shook her head. No, you're not. You're stronger than anyone I've met. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw the young woman my son had fallen in love with. Not proud, not defensive, just human. What made you come today? I asked. She hesitated, then said, My parents fought after dinner that night. My father said he felt humiliated. My mother told him maybe he needed to look at himself. And for the first time, I saw them differently. I saw how quick they are to value people by appearances. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. She continued. Then I realized I'd done the same to you. And it made me sick. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know if you'll forgive me, but I needed to say it. I reached for her hand gently. Lena, forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you grow into. You've already started. She let out a shaky breath. Ethan doesn't know I'm here. He's been so confused since that night. He said he feels like he doesn't even know his own mother anymore. I smiled softly. Then maybe it's time he gets to know her. That evening, Ethan came over. He looked tired, but there was a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in weeks. He sat down beside me quietly. Lena told me she came to see you, he said. Yes. I nodded. She told me everything, about what she realized, about how she saw herself that night. And how do you see her? I asked. He sighed. As someone learning. Just like me. He looked at me, his eyes glistening. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I should have known better. I placed my hand on his. You're my son, Ethan. I don't need your defense. I just need your understanding. He nodded, swallowing hard. I have that now. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Then he said something that melted every heavy thought in my heart. You always taught me that dignity doesn't need to be loud. I forgot that. But you reminded me. Tears stung my eyes, but I smiled. We all forget sometimes, son. What matters is that we remember before it's too late. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The city was still asleep, and the only sound was the faint hum of cars far away. I sat by the window with my cup of tea, watching the light slowly spill across the rooftops. My heart felt heavier than it should. I had planned to play a small act, to see how my daughter-in-law's family treated someone they believed was poor. But now, after what I'd seen at that dinner, it didn't feel like an act anymore. It felt personal. I kept hearing Simone's mother's voice echoing in my head. It's not good for a man to have too many burdens, especially financial ones, and Simone's soft laughter that followed. Marcus didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. He just kept eating, pretending not to notice the quiet humiliation sitting right beside him. I told myself not to judge him yet. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he didn't know what to say. But inside, I could feel the distance, a wall that had quietly grown between us over the years. When I reached the office later that day, I tried to bury myself in work. I had a board meeting scheduled with overseas clients, numbers to present, and decisions to make. In that space, I was someone else, composed, confident, respected. But halfway through the meeting, my mind drifted back to that dinner table. I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. For years, I had been proud of raising a son who was kind, disciplined, and humble. But somewhere along the way, he had started to see people differently, by their clothes, their car, their bank balance, and that hurt more than any rude comment. That evening, when I came home, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Mom, thank you for coming last night. Sorry if it was a bit awkward. Simone's parents can be traditional. Traditional. That was the word he chose. I smiled bitterly. I typed back, "It's all right, dear. Don't worry about me." But my fingers trembled before pressing send. I sat there staring at that small screen and thought, maybe it was time my son knew who his mother really was. Not to prove anything, not out of pride, but to remind him that worth isn't measured in appearances. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, Simone invited me to their home for a small family dinner. "Just us," she said, her voice overly sweet. Marcus thought it would be nice to have a cozy evening. I accepted. But I knew something was behind that invitation. When I arrived, the house looked spotless, candles lit on the dining table, soft music playing in the background. Marcus greeted me politely but seemed uneasy. Simone came out of the kitchen with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, we wanted to talk to you," she said, motioning me to sit. The words, "talk to you," already told me what kind of evening it would be. I sat down quietly. Simone began, "You know, Marcus and I are planning to buy a bigger apartment. Something more suitable for entertaining guests. Maybe even for when we start a family. But well," she looked at Marcus for support. "We've been struggling to collect the down payment. The bank said we need a larger initial sum." Marcus sighed softly. "Mom, I didn't want to bring this up, but we were wondering if you could help. Even a small contribution would mean a lot." I looked at them both. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I could have written a check right there for the full amount, even bought them the apartment outright. But the way Simone's mother had looked down on me, the way Marcus had stayed silent that night, it wasn't about the money anymore. I wanted them to see beyond it. So I said very softly, "Marcus, you know I live simply. I don't have much saved, but I'll see what I can manage. Maybe 1,000 or 2. Simone's smile froze. "Oh, I see." Marcus cleared his throat. "That's fine, Mom. We understand." But I saw disappointment in his eyes, and something else too. Shame, maybe, or frustration. The dinner dragged on after that, but the warmth was gone. Simone barely spoke. Marcus kept glancing at his phone. When I left, Simone didn't even walk me to the door. As I stepped outside into the night air, the silence hit me harder than any insult could. My own son, the boy I had held when he was sick, who used to run to me after every scraped knee, now saw me as a burden. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was hurt, but because I finally realized that somewhere along the way, I had taught him everything except compassion. A few days later, I received a message from Simone's mother, the last person I expected to hear from. "Mrs. Carter, it's Linda. Could we meet for coffee? I have something to discuss." I hesitated, but curiosity won. We met at a cafe near the downtown plaza. She arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in a designer suit, her perfume filling the air before she even sat down. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, stirring her cappuccino. "I'll be direct. I know Marcus and Simone are struggling with their finances. I thought maybe as his mother you could do something to help them. It's a shame when a young couple has to worry so much about money." Her tone was polite, but her eyes were cold. I smiled gently. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but Marcus and Simone are adults. I believe they should learn to handle their life together." She leaned back, lips curling. "Of course. But you see, appearances matter in our world. You must understand that, given your situation." I let her words hang in the air. My situation. If only she knew. I could have told her then about the contracts I signed that made companies millions, about the employees who looked up to me, about the homes I'd quietly bought and rented out under different names. But I stayed silent, because silence sometimes teaches louder lessons than words. When we stood up to leave, she offered me a small smile, the kind of smile people give when they think they're better than you. That evening, as I drove home, something inside me shifted. I realized this act had gone far enough. They had shown me their hearts. Now it was time to show them mine. The following week, I received an invitation that surprised me. It wasn't from Marcus or Simone. It was from my company. Annual Gala Dinner. All executives and their families are invited. Usually, I never attended with family. My work life and personal life were two separate worlds. But this time, I saw an opportunity. Not for revenge, but for truth. I called Marcus. "Sweetheart, my company is hosting a formal dinner next Saturday. Would you and Simone like to come as my guests?" There was a pause. Then Marcus said, "Oh, that sounds great, Mom. What kind of company is it again?" He still didn't know. After all these years, he thought I worked as some mid-level clerk. "It's just a small firm," I replied with a soft chuckle. "But it might be a nice evening." Simone agreed quickly. I could hear the excitement in her voice, probably imagining fancy food, important people, and a chance to show off. That week, I prepared quietly. I didn't tell them anything. I didn't hint. But inside, I knew. This would be the night everything changed. When the evening came, the ballroom shimmered with golden lights and soft music. Waiters carried trays of champagne glasses. Guests in elegant gowns and suits mingled, laughing softly. I stood near the entrance, greeting colleagues as they arrived. Then I saw them. Marcus and Simone walking in, both dressed perfectly. Simone's eyes widened as she looked around. "Mom, this place is incredible," she whispered. "I didn't know you worked for such a big company." I smiled. It's home in many ways. A few minutes later, the company's director, a kind man who had worked with me for over 15 years, approached with a wide smile. "There she is, our best strategic head, the woman who keeps this company standing." He hugged me warmly and turned to Marcus. You must be her son. She's a legend here. Everyone respects her. Marcus blinked. Wait, strategic head? Before I could answer, the director continued. Yes, she's been our senior executive for years. She's brilliant, manages multi-million-dollar contracts like it's second nature. Simone's jaw dropped. Marcus looked at me, eyes wide, words frozen on his lips. For the first time in years, I saw him speechless. I simply smiled and said, I told you, dear. True power doesn't shout. The music swelled behind us, laughter, and conversation filling the air. But between us there was only silence. Not angry silence, not awkward silence, just the kind that comes when truth finally arrives. That night changed everything. Marcus barely spoke as we drove home. Simone sat quietly beside him, her hand on his arm, her face pale. Finally, as I stepped out of the car, Marcus whispered, Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I turned to him and smiled softly. Because I wanted you to grow into your own man, not one who leaned on his mother's success, and I wanted to see how much you valued people for who they are, not what they have. He looked away, his throat tightening. Simone's eyes glistened. I touched his hand gently. It's all right, son. Some lessons take time. Then I walked toward my door, calm, composed, and at peace. That night, after the gala, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with a soft blanket around my shoulders, staring at the small clock on the table. It ticked quietly in the dark room, the sound almost comforting. Outside, the city lights shimmered like tiny stars, and I thought about everything that had happened. For years, I had hidden my truth. Not because I was ashamed of success, but because I wanted Marcus to grow without the shadow of privilege. I had wanted him to see the world as I had seen it once, from the ground up, where every small achievement felt like a mountain climbed. But as I looked at my reflection in the window, I realized something. Maybe I had gone too far in my silence. Maybe my quiet lessons had turned into walls instead of bridges. Because the truth was, my son didn't know me anymore. He didn't know the woman behind the modest clothes or the calm voice. He didn't know the weight I carried or the choices I made so that he could live a comfortable life. And now that he did, I wasn't sure if he would ever look at me the same way again. I sighed deeply and whispered to the empty room, maybe that's the price of pride, even the quiet kind. 2 days later, Marcus called. His voice was softer than usual. Mom, can we come by tonight? Simone and we'd like to talk. I told him yes. That evening, I prepared tea and a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just soup, some bread, and warm light in the kitchen. I wanted the space to feel like home again. When they arrived, I could see hesitation in their faces. They stood at the door for a few seconds, unsure how to begin. Come in, I said gently. You're home. Simone was the first to speak once we sat down. Mrs. Carter, Mom, her voice trembled. I want to apologize for the way I behaved, for the way my parents behaved. I had no idea who you were. I just thought you were... I raised a hand softly. Someone ordinary? Her eyes filled with tears. Yes. And I'm ashamed of that thought. Marcus sat beside her, silent, eyes fixed on the table. I looked at them both, my heart heavy, but calm. Simone, it's not about knowing who I am on paper. It's about seeing who I am as a person. You and your parents didn't owe me respect because of my job or money. You owed it because I'm human. because I'm Marcus's mother. That's all I ever wanted." She nodded, wiping her eyes. Then Marcus finally looked up. "Mom, I failed you," he said quietly. "That night at the restaurant, I should have stood up for you. I saw the way they spoke to you. I didn't say anything because I was embarrassed. I was afraid they'd think less of me." I reached out and touched his hand. "You're not the first person to let pride get in the way of kindness, son. But you must remember this. Silence can hurt as much as words." He nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered. I smiled gently. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Marcus. It's about freeing yourself from what you've done. I forgive you, not because I'm your mother, but because I understand what it means to be human. We all stumble. We all forget what truly matters sometimes." The room was quiet after that. Only the soft ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. Simone reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. "I promise," she said softly, "I'll never look at anyone the same way again. I've learned something I'll never forget." I smiled faintly. That's all I could ever hope for. After they left that night, I sat by the window again, the same way I had 2 nights before. But this time, my heart felt lighter. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make you forget, but it helps you move forward without bitterness. And that's a kind of peace money can't buy. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The air was cool, filled with the smell of fresh rain. The world seemed calm again, like everything had quietly fallen back into its place. I thought about Marcus as a boy, the way he used to bring me wildflowers from the park, how he'd wait for me by the window when I worked late, how his laughter used to fill the house. That little boy was still in there somewhere, just hidden behind the layers of adulthood and pride, and I knew then we would be okay. A week later, Marcus invited me to his home again, this time for Sunday lunch. When I arrived, Simone was in the kitchen cooking. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the air. "Sit down, Mom," she said warmly. "Marcus will set the table." Her tone was genuine. There was no forced politeness this time, no uneasy glances, just warmth. As we ate, Marcus began sharing stories from work, laughing again, just like old times. And every now and then, I caught him looking at me differently. Not with guilt, but with a kind of quiet admiration. Halfway through lunch, Simone said softly, "We told my parents everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" She nodded. "They were shocked. My mother felt terrible. She said she wanted to call you personally to apologize." I smiled faintly. "Tell her she doesn't need to. Some lessons are best learned in silence." Simone's eyes softened. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Yes," I said quietly. Humility doesn't grow from words. It grows from moments that make us rethink who we are. There was a peaceful silence after that, the kind that fills a room when everyone finally understands each other. When I was leaving, Marcus walked me to the door, just like he used to when he was younger. Before I stepped outside, he hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just held him close, feeling his heartbeat against mine. "I love you too, son," I said softly. Always. In the weeks that followed, our relationship changed in small but meaningful ways. Marcus started visiting more often. Sometimes he'd drop by after work just to share a meal. Simone would bring small gifts, flowers, a cake, or sometimes just her company. But more than that, they began to see me, not as the woman who lived modestly, not as the mother who stayed silent, but as a person who had her own journey, her own story. And in that simple understanding, our family found something money could never buy: respect rooted in love. One evening, months later, Marcus called me unexpectedly. "Mom, remember that apartment we wanted to buy? We finally got it. But only because you taught us how to save properly. Simone and I wanted to say thank you." I smiled into the phone. "I didn't teach you to save money, Marcus. I taught you to value what can't be bought." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. And I finally understand what that means." That night, I sat by my window once more, looking at the lights of the city. I thought about all the paths life takes, the quiet ones, the painful ones, the ones that circle back home. I realized something simple but powerful. We spend so much time trying to prove ourselves to others, forgetting that the real test is in how we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer us. Respect, kindness, humility, those are the true measures of character, and sometimes life has to strip away our illusions before we can see them clearly. As I finished my tea, I whispered softly to myself. I acted like a poor and naive mother, but in truth, I was just a mother who wanted to see if love still existed without wealth standing beside it. And I smiled, because I knew now it did. It's strange how life works sometimes. We spend so many years running to prove, to protect, to stay strong for others. And before we know it, the people we love the most begin to forget who we really are. I used to think that success was about what you could hold in your hands. Now I know that true success is about what you can hold in your heart. Peace, kindness, forgiveness. When I look back on everything that happened, the dinner, the humiliation, the truth finally coming to light, I realize it wasn't just a story about me pretending to be poor. It was a story about seeing people's hearts when they think no one is watching, because that's when you see who they truly are. After that night, my life didn't change in big, dramatic ways. I still lived in the same modest apartment. I still carried the same worn-out handbag. I still cooked my own food and took long walks every morning. But something inside me shifted. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt peaceful. Marcus called me more often. Sometimes he didn't even have a reason. He'd just say, "Hey Mom, what are you doing?" Thought I'd check in, and that alone was enough to make my heart smile. Simone, too, changed. She became softer, more thoughtful. She started volunteering at a local shelter, teaching kids how to read. One afternoon, she told me quietly, "You inspired me, Mom. You made me realize how much I used to take for granted." I didn't say much, just smiled. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. One Sunday morning, Marcus came over alone. He looked around the apartment and smiled. "You've lived here all these years," he said softly, "even when you could have had a mansion." I nodded, because a big house doesn't always mean a happy home. He sat down beside me, quiet for a while. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I used to feel sorry for you, Mom. I thought you'd worked your whole life and had nothing to show for it. But now I see. You have everything that really matters." I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "And now you do too, my son." That day, after he left, I walked around my apartment and looked at the little things I'd kept over the years. A photo of Marcus as a boy, the cracked teacup my mother once used, the notebook where I'd written every expense in my early days. All those small, ordinary things that told the story of my life. A life built quietly, not for show, but for meaning. I thought of all the people out there who live unseen. The mothers, The fathers, the quiet souls who carry their strength in silence, people who don't need applause to know their worth, people who give, forgive, and keep moving forward. And I wished I could tell them all the same thing I told myself that night. You don't need to shout your value. The people who truly see you will never need you to prove it. Time moved gently after that. Seasons changed. The leaves turned gold, then fell, then bloomed again. Every now and then, Marcus would bring Simone and the children to visit. Yes, children. Little ones who ran around my living room, laughing, calling me Grandma. Sometimes, when I looked at them, I'd see Marcus's eyes, full of innocence and wonder, the same as when he was small. And I'd whisper a quiet prayer that they'd grow up learning what took us a lifetime to understand. That love isn't measured by what you have. It's measured by how you make others feel when you think no one's watching. One evening, as the sun was setting, Simone and I sat together on the balcony. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks. She was quiet for a long time, then said softly, "You know, I used to think strength was about speaking louder than everyone else. But after everything, I realized it's about staying silent when your heart is hurting and still choosing kindness." I smiled at her, eyes warm. That's a lesson I wish more people learned earlier in life. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening in the fading light. You taught it to me. And for the first time, I saw her not just as my daughter-in-law, but as another woman walking her own path, making her own mistakes, learning her own lessons. We weren't so different after all. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that first dinner, the one where I walked into the restaurant pretending to be poor. I remember how heavy my heart felt when I sat there, surrounded by smiles that weren't kind, by words that cut in quiet ways. But now, when I look back, I don't feel pain anymore. I feel gratitude, because that night showed me the truth, not just about others, but about myself. It showed me how strong, quiet dignity can be. It showed me that sometimes the best way to teach isn't through anger or pride, but through patience and grace. If I had lashed out that night, if I had revealed everything in anger, I would have lost the chance to let them grow on their own. But by staying silent, by letting them see themselves clearly, I gave them something far greater than revenge. I gave them reflection. And maybe that's what life is really about in the end. Reflection. Not on how much we've earned, but on what we've learned. Not on how people treated us, but on how we responded when they did. We can't control how others see us, but we can always choose how we carry ourselves, and sometimes, the quietest people in the room are the ones with the loudest stories to tell. When I look at my life now, I don't see wealth or success. I see memories, a son who grew wiser, a daughter-in-law who found humility, and a family that learned to love without conditions. If I could go back, I wouldn't change anything. Not the tears, not the silence, not the pretending. Because every step, every misunderstanding, every moment of doubt led us to this, to understanding, to forgiveness, to peace. So if you're listening to this, maybe you've been where I was, unseen, underestimated, quietly carrying your worth while others overlook you. Let me tell you something I've learned. You don't have to prove your value to anyone. Your silence doesn't mean weakness. Your kindness doesn't mean you're naive. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stay still. Let the world misunderstand you, and keep walking in truth anyway. Because one day, the truth will walk into the room for you, and when it does, you'll smile quietly, just like I did, and realize you were never small, you were just humble, and that's the greatest strength of all. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every message you share reminds me that these stories don't just belong to one person. They belong to all of us who have felt love, loss, and forgiveness in some way. If you'd like to listen to more stories like this one, simply click on the video that's appearing on the right side of your screen. Each story carries its own lesson, its own quiet strength, and perhaps something that speaks to a part of your own journey too. And if you'd like to support this channel and help me continue bringing more real and meaningful stories to life, you can send a super thanks in the comments. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and your kindness allows me to share even more voices that deserve to be heard.